Hi, you guys. Welcome to the Ask the Egg Whisperers, plural. I'm Dr. Aimee, and I'm a fertility expert here in the San Francisco Bay Area. And thank you for joining me today. On today's Ask the Egg Whisperers, I have Elena Trukhacheva, who's going to join us today to answer your questions, and I'm super excited to have her on. So she'll be joining us here in a moment. And so you guys asked a lot of questions today. We're talking about AMH levels of, let's say, 0.4, someone asking about embryos surviving the thawing process, as well as someone talking about a miscarriage they had, going through Ivf cycles with endometrial hyperplasia. So we're going to talk about PCOS as well, all of these things. So I'm super, super happy to bring her on here as soon as she joins us. Let me see, there she is. Awesome. I'm going to just grab her right now. Here we go.
Hi, Amy, how are you?
Hi, I'm doing great. Thanks for joining us today. And so for followers who don't know you, can you just introduce yourself, tell us where you practice, and tell us what your patients call you?
Yes, absolutely. So my official name is Elena Trukhacheva. I'm Russian. I have a difficult last name, so I go by Dr. T. That seems to work well. I am practicing in Chicago. I have been practicing for about 12 years after fellowship. I'm a president and medical director of Reproductive Medicine Institute, with the second largest practice in Chicago and probably in the Midwest.
Mm-hmm.
I did training at Northwestern here and then kind of stayed after fellowship.
Okay, cool. I have this thing with languages that whenever I speak to someone who speaks another language, I think that I can talk to them in that language, and I know that I can't. But I can just say, Здравствуйте, меня зовут Dr. Aimee.
You sound excellent. You're doing really well.
I try. I feel like, I always want to learn the language of people who I'm around. So thank you for joining us today, Elena. So really appreciate you taking out the time, especially because we know here it's later for you there in Chicago. So thank you. So are you ready to answer our questions?
Yes, let's go for it.
Let's do it. Cool. So this question is from SS. So SS question says, Dr. Aimee, let me start by saying you're amazing and thank you for all you do. And by the way, I think you're funny. And full disclosure, this isn't my first question submitted, so I understand if you need to answer other people's questions. Okay, you guys, we can't tell if you've asked other questions, so don't worry about that. So this is the question that SS has. Statistically, how many embryos, day 2 or day 3, would a 43-year-old woman have to freeze to have one live birth? I know that everyone is different, but I'm trying to get a sense of math and attrition rate. Here are my stats. 43, almost 44, AMH 0.4, DOR patient with Hashimoto's being treated by an endocrinologist and functional doctor. Because of my DOR, my RE has recommended that we freeze day 2. So I'm trying to see what I would need to bank to reach a statistically significant chance of having a live birth. Thank you again. PS blue is your color. So what do you think?
Well, honestly, I don't quite understand the recommendation to freeze the embryos on day 2 or day 3, because as we know, for somebody who is 43 years old with diminished reserve, more than half of these embryos are not going to develop to blastocysts. So I feel like you're kind of fooling yourself. You feel like you have those embryos, but maybe you don't. So I would recommend to try to grow these embryos to the blastocyst stage. And then one option will be to test these embryos for chromosomes, and another option will be to leave them alone. But I would say if you don't test them, you almost need, I would say 3 to 6 embryos. If you test them, then each embryo, because untested embryo gives you maybe 15–20% chance, if that. Mm-hmm. If you do test the embryos for chromosomes, then each embryo will give you about 50% chance. So maybe a better option will be to grow them to blastocysts and test them, so you have a little bit a better idea of what is it exactly that you have frozen.
I agree. I think when people go online and they Google this stuff, they get this perception that they're going to lose embryos that could have implanted if they let them continue to grow. And you and I both know that there's that natural attrition that occurs, and you're not losing anything. You're just learning more about what you've gained. So I totally agree with your approach and exactly what you just shared with us. That's basically exactly what I would say as well. So thank you. So this next question is from Danielle. Danielle is asking, I will soon transfer the only normal embryo I have after multiple stimulated and also natural cycles. I read that some embryos don't survive the thawing process. Could you please tell me when this occurs? Does it happen more to abnormal embryos than to normal ones? And what is the percentage of embryos that don't survive the thaw?
So I think it's a little bit, it depends a little bit on the IVF lab, but I think most labs in a kind of reputable IVF centers use vitrification. And in our center, the chances for the embryo is frozen on day 5 not to survive is less than 5%, probably more like 2-3%. So in general, the chances that the embryo does not survive the thaw is less than 5%. Honestly, we kind of guess it happens more to abnormal embryos than to normal, but we don't really have any good tools to test. So I think the chances are small, less than 5%. It could be that it happens more to abnormal embryos, but we don't really have this data.
Yeah, I agree with you. I'm a little older than you, and so I just remember the time when we would do transfers, I would literally just expect my phone to ring from the IVF lab saying, Aimee, the embryo didn't thaw. And now it's so rare, I can't even think of the last time the lab called me that the embryo didn't survive. So
absolutely,
we're very lucky.
Great news for everybody.
Yeah. Okay, so this next question is from Gina. Gina says, I got the results of my genetic testing as inconclusive. They said they need to do another biopsy, but this might affect the embryo, but in a lower rate. Excuse me, this embryo is my best embryo, 5BB. If the results are normal, would I still consider it as my first option to transfer, even though this embryo had 2 biopsies? My other normal embryos are 5BC and 6BB. What do you think?
So I think this is a little bit of a tricky question, but so I assume the 5BC and 6BB are tested and normal. So I think there is probably very little difference between 6BB embryo and 5BB embryo. It took a little bit longer for this embryo to expand, and we see that. And if those embryos are normal, they are compatible. So we're looking at 6BB that is normal and 5BB that went through the biopsy. To be honest with you, my gut feeling just tells me to go to 6BB, because sometimes if there is failed amplification for the first round of testing, there could be a reason for it. We don't know. So I would honestly, if it was my patient, I would have tell her, hey, Gina, let's do the 6BB embryo and hope for the best. In the meanwhile, we can rebiopsy 5BB, and those 2 are probably compatible.
I agree. And then sometimes I would be a little bit of a risk taker. And I don't know if you would agree with this, is maybe transfer the 6BB with the untested 5BB based on her age, depending on her age.
I agree. Okay. I agree, because I feel like, look, 10 years ago, we transferred untested embryos all the time, and most of the time we get a healthy baby. Yeah. And actually her risk, I don't know how old she is, but in general, even if she is 40, her chances to have a baby with Down syndrome or with trisomy that will live are extremely small.
Right. Right, I agree. And that's a good thing to think about too. Maybe even like doing another cycle right now to get more embryos for herself if she is around 40.
Sure.
Okay, this question is from Yvonne. Thank you for being available. I'm 39 years old. I have a low AMH. In my first IVF, I had 7 eggs, 5 mature, and 5 blasts. I'm concerned with transferring though, because I have been told that I have adenomyosis. What would your protocol be for transfer? Should I bank more eggs? Should I start a down regulation? What would you do?
So first of all, this is amazing outcome. So this patient got 7 eggs and 5 were mature, and every one of them became a blastocyst. It's amazing. We usually would see this for egg donors, and not even every egg donor will, give us this excellent eggs. But she's 39, so maybe another cycle is maybe in the picture. Maybe it's not a bad idea to get more eggs and get more embryos. Another thing is, it's hard to tell how bad is her adenomyosis. So the good news is that she has so many embryos. I would maybe even just get her ready for transfer and do the transfer. And I think you can do down regulation with Lupron, or you can just do estrogen, and the outcomes are kind of similar.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree. The severity of her adeno would make a huge difference. And I would have her ask her doctor, what is the severity and what do I need to do to treat it if I need to treat it? And I agree, in some cases, you just want to transfer and see what happens, especially when you have that number of blastocysts. She could get pregnant the first time and not have to go through a whole lot more than she's already gone through. Okay, this question is from Diana. So Diana says, I just turned 40 and had a miscarriage in late February, and the pregnancy had abnormal chromosomes. After the miscarriage, I discovered that my AMH level was 0.4. I only had 4 follicles showing, which dramatically dropped from a year and a half ago when I had 12 follicles and an AMH of 1.2. I've since done a round of IUI, but I'm wondering if it even makes sense to do IVF versus trying naturally, as I can only expect to get 1 to 2 eggs per cycle. My doctor has said it could take up to 6 rounds. What do you think I should do?
Well, it's a little bit of a tough situation to be in. So she's 40. The good news, Diana was just pregnant recently. It was a loss, but she was pregnant. It's a little bit reassuring. The reason for her loss is probably an aneuploidy. It's kind of a transition from where it's a little bit more difficult to get pregnant. You create more abnormal embryos. You're more likely to have losses. I would say with an AMH of 0.4, with a really aggressive stimulation, we would hope for maybe 4 to 6 to sometimes even 8 eggs. It will help. She has 4 follicles, so okay, maybe 4 eggs. So I think if she can financially afford it, IVF is not a bad idea with testing of the embryos. So one option is, do IVF, test the embryos. Another option is try naturally, but the problem is if Diana doesn't get pregnant the next 3 to 6 months, probably the situation is going to be even worse and it's going to be even more difficult to treat her.
Right. Yeah, I agree. I mean, we all 100% will be infertile, right? We'll always run out of all of our eggs. And I always tell people, fast forward and ask yourself, would I regret not having tried IVF? And for some people, if you tell them what the statistics are, they actually make a decision to use an egg donor, then go through a cycle themselves after what they experience, for example, with an abnormal pregnancy. So I'm right there with you.
It's another option to kind of, I agree with you, Aimee, to maybe save your resources, try naturally for 6 to 12 months, hope for the best. If you don't have any luck, then maybe use an egg donor, which will give her an excellent chance to have a baby.
I agree. Okay. This question is from Lauren. In a normal unmedicated monthly cycle, do you ovulate the highest quality or strongest egg of those available that month? Or is it randomly chosen?
So it's $1 million question. We don't know. We think it's the strongest eggs because it's kind of fascinating what happens in the ovary. So every month in the ovary, quite a few little baby eggs are kind of on the start line and they're ready to grow and develop. But the brain only makes enough hormones to recruit one of them, allow one of them to grow. So they kind of, in a way, run the marathon and, grab the supplies and try to kind of support themselves the best they can. So we kind of believe that the best, strongest eggs gets to ovulate, but we don't really have good research about it.
Yeah, I mean, I call that, so Follicle Dynamics is what I call it. And we just know, I mean, I know I didn't invent that name, but we know so little about what goes into how the body picks the eggs, right? I mean, it's so frustrating. I wish we could put like some sort of tracer on an egg and actually see where it is in the body as well, as far as when is it in the fallopian tube, where is it in its journey down the tube into the uterus. One of
my older professors used to say, when I was an OBGYN resident, we will be sitting in a big audience, and one of my old professors used to say, you will never be as lucky as when you were an egg that ovulated and got fertilized and became an embryo that implanted and became a baby. There is something to it. We're all kind of winners, big time.
Right, that's true. That's true. That's cute. So this question is from Maya. So Maya says, hi, Dr. Aimee, I'm 39. I've had 2 failed IVF cycles. One first with 4 eggs. The second, I had 10 eggs. My AMH is 0.88. I also have had endometriomas, a history of hyperplasia. And because of the hyperplasia, my doctor placed an IUD to treat it. I had a biopsy after 3 months and I don't have hyperplasia anymore, but I still have the IUD. How do you do a biopsy with an IUD? Would you do that?
I think it's doable. I think you
okay.
get the papel in and you might get some tissue.
Okay. My doc does not recommend to remove it until the last minute, just in case. Another doctor recommended to remove it right away because he said it suppresses the eggs. Without it, I might have more eggs. Which one is correct? Should I remove the IUD? Thank you so much. What do you think?
So it must be a progesterone-containing IUD, because that will make sense to place it for somebody who has hypoplasia.
Right.
So I think we only have a couple of small studies looking at the egg donors who go through stimulations with a progesterone-containing IUD in place. And I think the data kind of tells us that the results are comparable.
Right.
And, you know, endometrial hypoplasia, in my experience, is very difficult to treat and very difficult to beat. So there might be no exactly enough good data, but I would say keep an IUD until you're ready to proceed with transfer, to give you the best chance to have normal lining and prevent the hypoplasia from coming back.
Yeah, no, that's a great point. And I'm glad you brought up doing a biopsy with an IUD. That seems, I mean, counterintuitive a little, but you're right. It's totally doable.
You know, you and I spent our whole life putting stuff into the uterus. That's
Yes.
what we do today. So I think you can get there.
I think you're right. I think you're right. Okay. And then I want to ask you this question. So she's 39 with 2 failed cycles, AMH of 0.88 with a history of endometriosis, obviously, because she has endometriomas. What she didn't ask us is what would we do in her case? Like, what would you do?
So what I would do, so she's 40, right? 39
Yeah.
with low AMH. So my most aggressive stimulation approach with a lot of variation, I sometimes use estrogen or testosterone priming in the luteal phase, sometimes both. I would use the flare lupron because I feel like it frequently helps us to recruit more eggs.
Okay.
I would use the growth hormone. I would use the Follistim and Menopur and Ganirelix. And I would also add low-dose HCG. Low-dose HCG is basically like a very powerful Menopur,
Right.
but it allows us to give the patient a higher amount of HCG in a fairly affordable and easy way. So that would have been my approach. And honestly, I would hope she would do well. She got 10 eggs the second time. She has a good chance to get another 10 or maybe a couple more.
So how do you describe to us, how do you do the microdose flare? So you use Lupron in the beginning and then also use the antagonist?
So usually the problem with microdose flare, the way I see it, that usually frequently we do use it in poor responders when we kind of try to recruit more eggs. But what happens, like sometimes when the bigger follicles become big enough, closer to 17, 18, 19 millimeters, and we look at that group of follicles and we want to grow them for a couple more days,
right.
Sometimes the flare dose lupron will not always prevent you from premature luteinization. So sometimes one of these follicles can try to start to ovulate, and then you can lose your whole group before you go for retrieval.
Right.
So I see the flare lupron, the benefit of it in the beginning of a cycle when we're trying to recruit more eggs and grow more eggs. And once you have big enough follicles, it's not so critical. And some patients wouldn't need the Ganirelix at the end of the cycle, but I frequently do use it for a couple of days to prevent the premature luteinization. So we don't have a situation where we come for monitoring and the patient ovulated, or we come for retrieval and don't get much.
Yeah, I mean, that's a really bad day. I mean, that's a really bad day. So do you add the Ganirelix they continue the flare lupron and you add the Ganirelix as another layer, or they basically stop the flare lupron and then you add the Ganirelix?
I honestly think you can probably go either way, but I would usually continue the flare lupron because there is no harm to continue. The patient already has a kit and is used to it, and it's only a couple more days of injection, so we would usually continue it.
Yeah, exactly. I totally agree. That's very cool to hear you say that, to have other people hear how creative doctors can be when it comes to doing different things for people who've gone through already 1 or 2 cycles. There's always something else that we can do. Okay, so this question is from, actually Maya asked another question here. This is the next one. I knew there should be another question. My other question is, my first 2 cycles were with estrogen priming and then omnitrope during the stim cycle along with Menopur, Follistim, and Ganirelix. I had abnormal embryos. I talked to 2 other doctors to get their opinion. One of them said, estrogen or Lupron priming is not right for me because they suppress my eggs and my AMH is 0.88. He only recommended starting with Follistim, then Menopur, and Ganirelix. He basically said, keep it simple, no growth hormone, no priming. The other doctor recommends Lupron and omnitrope priming. What do you think? I have endometriomas. I'm 39 years old. I'm very scared. So look, we just answered her question and I didn't even ask it.
Yes, well, I think we agreed that maybe we should not keep it simple. Maybe we should add some other medications that hopefully will help us to get more eggs and better eggs.
Exactly. Okay, good. So this question is from Karen, and Karen is saying, hi, I'm 37 years old. I was on birth control for 17 years until 2017. I had surgeries on my shoulder and lower back this past year. I had a successful retrieval and tested embryos. I came out with 5 really good embryos, gold as my doctor called them. I have 2 failed FETs so far, and my uterus will not budge, and I think she means her lining. I'm doing the Lupron, aspirin, vitamin E, steroids, estrogen, and some other pill, and looking like it will fail again. I've lost 17 pounds. I stopped caffeine and wine. I was never fat, just squishy. Now I'm 2 sizes smaller, and I've never had fertility issues. It was my husband's weird sperm that made it so that we have to do this. And we have no DNA issues, never had an STD, endometriosis, and I don't have PCOS. What can I do? And I read so much about this. I'm looking for your help. What do you think?
So I think we kind of need a little bit more information, kind of what exactly is going on here. So the very kind of straightforward question, what did the preparation for FET look like? But if we look at the big picture, what I would say is the uterus normal. So we usually do settings on a histogram, the test when we put fluid into the uterus and do an ultrasound. So did that test show that the uterus is normal? Mm-hmm. If we have concerns about the uterus, one option is hysteroscopy, look inside of the uterus. You know, another situation is usually my standard approach to get ready for frozen embryo transfers will be oral estrogen. There are a number of ways you can do it, but usually it will be oral estrogen. And if the lining grows, we add usually injectable progesterone for 6 days before we do the transfer. Some women who do not grow the lining, I wonder, she lost 17 pounds once in a while. When our patients lose a lot of weight over a certain short period of time, they develop hypothalamic dysfunction and they might not grow the best lining on estrogen. So my second option would be to just give her injections, like give her a little bit of Follistim on Menopur to kind of grow the lining in a mild stimulated cycle, or try to watch her in a natural cycle to see if she develops nice lining in a natural cycle and then start progesterone.
Yeah, I agree. And the other thing is, which she gave us a clue, and that was the diagnosis of her husband's sperm. So I also just wonder, how bad was the sperm? Were there any DNA fragmentation issues? Because even if you have beautiful embryos, if the sperm was highly fragmented, your implantation rate might not be as good. So that's another question for her to ask her doctor, but I totally agree with you. So this question is from Diana, and then we're soon going to get to your live chatted questions as well. I see there are a few of them. So this is from Diana. Diana is saying, hello, doctors. Thank you for all your optimistic and realistic approaches to fertility challenges. I'm 42 years old. I just finished my 5th round of IVF. I made between 15 to 24 eggs per cycle, from which 11 to 16 fertilized, but I only got 1 to 2 day 6 blasts each time. PGS testing showed severe chromosomal abnormalities and none were transferred. I was expecting to have a very low ratio of normal blasts, but I was expecting to have more blast formation. 1 out of 16 just seems really low. I asked the embryologist and she said stop growing around day 4 because they kind of fragment. Oh, sorry. It seems like what she's saying is I asked the embryologist and the embryologist said that the embryos stopped growing at day 4. Why do you think this is happening? Is this age related? Is it related to the lab? What do you think? And what do you think?
So I think there are a number of reasons that might potentially explain abnormal embryo development in this situation. So unfortunately, number one is age. If you're 17 and a half with perfect eggs, almost any IVF stimulation in any embryology lab can give you a good embryo. So unfortunately, part of that is age. Having said that, Diana is producing an amazing number of eggs and quite a few blastocysts. So the second important part is stimulation. So it's a problem that is difficult to manipulate, and it's kind of difficult for us to make an improvement. But if I were to see this in the first cycle, and honestly, pretty much all of my patients who are older than 40 do IVF. They don't do just Follistim and Menopur. They do additional medications that potentially might help us to improve the eggs. So I think the way to approach it, when you do IVF, there are some medications that simply help us recruit multiple eggs, which is Follistim and Menopur, or Gonal-F and Menopur, and that's what we use. There are some other medications that we believe might, we don't have a good data, but we believe might help us improve the egg quality, improve the embryo quality, and improve embryo development. So I would say we should modify the stimulation. Maybe estrogen, testosterone prime in the cycle before, growth hormone, fluorolupron, diluted HCG, see what we can get, higher dose of medications, maybe better sperm prep. We have been using a new system called Zymote, and that helps us to select kind of the healthiest sperm with minimal fragmentation. So that's probably something I would recommend. But having said that, I feel like until we try that, unfortunately, we're not, yeah, you've got the Zymote. Yeah, I know. It's amazing. I love it. But anyway, but having said that, I don't know if we can tell Diana what will actually happen with all these additions until we actually try it. So one option will be to try and modify kind of more aggressive IVF stimulation with some additional medications. Another option would be to use the embryos. We cannot use them. So another option might be donor eggs, because this is a tough situation to be in, and this could be one of those bridges where it's very difficult for us to cross it.
Right. And it's so hard. I mean, what I tell people all the time is just because you run out of healthy eggs doesn't mean you run out of your desire to have a healthy pregnancy, right? And so obviously she's very strong and resilient, going through 5 cycles and still ready to take on the challenge and do more, just shows how strong and resilient she is. So I really hope, Diana, that you are successful, and just know that we are rooting for you, but we also want you to be a parent. And you've been a patient, obviously, a long time and have gone through so much. So I agree, maybe consider other family building options. But I would say if you haven't done the stuff that, you know, me and Elena have talked about, perhaps it's a good thing to maybe consider one more cycle with someone who's going to be a little bit more creative with you, or talk to your doctor about being creative too. Okay. Thank you guys for sending in your questions. I'm going to now go to the live chatted questions. So I'm just going to scroll through here. So someone is asking if there are any grants available for people who do IVF. What do you tell your patients about that?
So in Chicago, we have created a foundation called Family Building Foundation. It used to be Kevin Lederer's foundation. And a lot of groups in Chicago have been providing a free cycle a year. So I think collectively we provide about 10 cycles a year. So the patients apply, they kind of write their stories, they write the essay, they have a letter of recommendation for the physician, kind of saying why this patient deserves a grant and what are your chances to be successful. And sometimes this is the patients who don't have the best chances to be successful, but everybody deserves a chance. So sometimes those patients don't have insurance, and we want to give them a chance. So that's the option we have locally. I'm not as well familiar with the options that people have nationally, but I think there are some foundations that provide options. You know, another thing is we are in Illinois, and a lot of big insurance companies and a lot of employers offer insurance for IVF. So once in a while, if that's a priority, you do look for a specific job or specific insurance. Some big tech companies like Google, Facebook, corporate Ubers are going to cover infertility and testing of the embryos. And in Illinois, a lot of insurance plans through Obamacare covers the treatment. So there are some options available nationally, locally, and I would tell the patient, try to be creative, see what your options are. Right. Maybe there is a job at Amazon for you, and that's kind of what you need at this point.
Yeah, I agree. So here's another question from Joyce. Dear doctors, for natural cycle frozen embryo transfer, is it normal to take crinone only once a day? Is this frequent enough? Thanks.
So honestly, I don't think so. The natural frozen embryo transfer cycles are a little bit tricky. I think they're very popular in Europe because injectable progesterone is not available in Europe. And I agree that injectable progesterone is not ideal at all, but it works predictably well. I would not use crinone only for frozen embryo transfers. I would use crinone twice a day, or endometrine 3 times a day. And for both approaches, I would usually use compounded progesterone lozenges. The combination of the two works extremely well and replaces injections. Because otherwise, unfortunately, some of the studies that were comparing injectable progesterone and crinone only, or endometrine, they were stopped because the efficacy was not exactly the same.
So you said progesterone lozenges, tell us about that.
Yeah, so I don't remember how did I learn about it, but you live, you learn. So there are a few local pharmacies that produce compounded progesterone lozenges. And the benefit of that is with vaginal approach, we rely kind of on venous and lymphatic flow and absorption, and it could be different for different people, and it could depend on the vaginal flora, and there is a little bit of variation. So the lozenges seem to deliver enough progesterone where it's the luteal support is almost perfect, and you can measure progesterone. I know the old generation of physicians, it makes them happy measuring progesterone. I'm not that old, but I feel like sometimes it makes me happy and my patients happy.
Right.
So that basically look like little lozenges. You have to use them 3 times a day, and they're a little bit pricey. They cost about $15 a piece, and you need like 3 of them a day. So it comes up to like $45 a piece. And at some point, I calculated that if you replace injections with vaginal products and lozenges, it will cost the patient almost $1,000 to frozen embryo transfer. But for those patients who absolutely cannot use injections, it works like a charm. It might be worth it.
And are these like they're like, I think of a lozenge as like a candy that you just suck on?
That's kind of what they look like. And my patients say they taste horrible, but it sounds like it's still better than injections.
Yes, for some people, they would rather do that. I love it. Okay, this question's from Becky Kelly. I'm 36, just had my first IVF. I had 8 follicles. They retrieved 4. 2 were empty and the other 2 didn't mature. I was devastated. Will this happen every month? And is 36 too late? I just have 1 ovary.
So I think we're missing a little bit of information. So we want to know, did she only have 8 antral follicles or she had more follicles? And it will be helpful to know what was the AMH level and did she have high FSH? So that would be helpful. But to be honest with you, it sounds like we should be able to do a little bit better for this patient. It sounds like with some modifications and stimulation and close monitoring, we should be able to get some healthy eggs for her, unless her AMH is really low and her FSH is really high.
Right, I agree. So this is another question from Elvie. What is the likelihood that a single embryo transfer can result in a splitting and 2 resulting twins?
About 5%, but it depends what you read. Some people say 5 to 10%. You mean double split, like split once and split again? Or
oh, no. Just I think her question is, how often can you get monozygotic twins from one embryo?
So, I remember I was at the SRM about 5 years ago, and one of my friends came and said, hey, have you seen this poster? Like, this group is reporting about 5 to 10% of monozygotic twinning with single embryo transfer. Like, this sounds crazy. Like, look at this poster. So I looked at the poster, and then I came home, and we looked at our statistics, and it was about right. But there is a lot of variation, like 1 year it will be 1%, another year it will be 5%, another year it will be 7%. So after that, I started quoting my patients about 5%.
Got it. Yeah, and that, I would say I probably see 1 set a year. So I would say it's not going to be 5%, but I always tell the patient who is that 1 set, you're my only set this year, and then I hope that I don't see another set, because those are some scary pregnancies.
But some years we don't see any, and some years we see a couple.
We see a lot, yeah. Okay, so this is another question. After a frozen 5-day transfer, how early can you feel pregnancy symptoms?
This is so tricky because I feel like some of this is kind of in our head. I hate to say it. And some of that is the effect of estrogen and progesterone. So what pregnancy symptoms? Like breast tenderness, you can almost feel it even right after the transfer before because your estrogen and progesterone is high enough. A little bit of nausea, sometimes estrogen will do it. A little bit of cramping is very hard to read. So I would say you can have some sensations almost right away. But until your pregnancy test is positive, not much is really happening in your body physiologically.
Yeah, I agree. I feel like the 2-week wait is just like torture for so many women, and I just feel for them as they're going through this. What kind of tips do you give your patients as far as how to distract themselves and what to do during that time?
Well, I try to tell them not to do the home pregnancy tests. I remember I had one husband who said, look, we can do this, but you have to tell my wife she cannot do a pregnancy test every day. Like, not only it costs money, it's so stressful. So why don't we set some boundaries, and why don't we all agree that we're going to do this,
Right.
but no home pregnancy test? So I would say, and I know the patients sometimes still do it, and I get it, and I don't know what I would have done. But I would say just be patient, because we're going to come to that point. And if we come to that point a little bit sooner, a little bit later, you might be stressing yourself out looking at the negative test when the time is right, the test will be positive.
I agree. That's a good way of thinking about it. So we have a few more questions. Do you have a little bit more time to answer them with us? Okay, cool. So this is from Pineapple Baby. Hello, doctors. I'm 42 years old. My first IVF cycle, I did an egg retrieval yesterday. I had 15 follicles and only 5 eggs, and only 2 were mature and fertilized. My AMH is 11. I did all the Tushy method and everything came up normal. What are the chances these 2 embryos will turn into a blastocyst?
It's hard to tell. So, I would say 30% per embryo, somewhere out there. I'm a little bit confused why out of so many follicles we've got 2 eggs. Sometimes it's a trigger, like sometimes it's a lupron trigger that is a little bit tricky. But sometimes also patients tell us they had 15 follicles and only 5 follicles were big enough where we expected mature eggs.
Right.
So I would say at this point, I would hope you will have an embryo. What are the chances each egg will become an embryo? 25, 30%.
Right. Yeah. And I feel like each cycle, if it doesn't work, you learn so much about your body, your fertility, and you can go back to your doctor and find out what you learned so that you can apply those lessons to the next cycle. Okay, so this question is there any way to know if you've had multiple chemical pregnancies when you always get negative pregnancy tests?
So I would say if you always have negative pregnancy test and your period comes, most likely you did not have a biochemical pregnancy. And once in a while, we do get a batch of the pregnancy test that's just a little bit off. So I would probably say if you got a period, your pregnancy test was negative, you probably were not pregnant.
Yeah, I agree. Okay, so this is from Joyce Moon. Dear doctors, 38 years old, AMH 3.5, FSH is 7, AFC 20, no other issues. Which IVF protocol would you use for stim and trigger? Thank you.
All right, 38 years old, AMH of
3.5.
3.5.
Yeah.
20 follicles.
Yep.
I would probably use something close to the plain protocol, like probably about 300 of Follistim, 150 units of Menopur Ganirelix. Having said that, sometimes I do add a little bit of low dose HCG for all the patients to boost the response a little bit. So I could have added maybe 25 units.
Okay, that's really, can you tell me how you dilute your HCG for the low dose HCG protocol?
So I would have to write it. Sometimes actually commercial pharmacies will do it, but the key is to dilute it right, because if you overdose it, you're not going to get any eggs. You cannot give more than 200 units.
Right.
And it drives your estrogen up in some patients quite a bit, so you have to be careful. But honestly, you just calculate. You look at the vial has 5,000 and 10,000, and you need 25, and you look at like units. So I have it written somewhere.
Got it.
It's tricky, but you just follow the protocol.
Sounds easy enough. 200 units. Okay. So
200 units is the max.
200 is the max.
200 units is the max. And remember, Menopur contains about 10 units.
Right.
So that's something to keep in mind if you use it. You can't give somebody who is young and sensitive too much. They're kind of going to fly through the roof.
Got it. We don't want anyone's eggs flying through the roof. No. Okay, so this is from Alicia. 36 years old, AMH 1.9, previous IVF cycle at 32 years old. Oh, sorry. Yeah, no, I'm saying this right. 6 day 5 embryos, same protocol to stim as previously at this age or anything different. So I think what she's saying, she's now 36 doing IVF and her AMH is 1.9, but when she was 32, she got 5 embryos. Which protocol should she use now? Should she use the same thing or stick to what she did before?
Well, we don't know what was her AMH before, so most likely her AMH was a little bit higher. So I would maybe increase her dose of medications a little bit. I would probably use a similar protocol, maybe increase the dose of medications a little bit.
Right. And I also want to know what happened with the embryos. So she had
Right.
6 day
Exactly.
5.
Where did these embryos go?
Exactly.
Maybe she had 5 kids.
Maybe. Between age 32 and 36.
No, probably not. That is
pretty hard. Pretty hard.
Yeah, probably
Okay,
not.
this question's from Sasha. If one of our embryos was an okay quality, but not strong enough to be biopsied, can it still become a healthy baby? And there's a second part to that question, but I'll ask you this one first.
I think the answer is yes. Once in a while, I remember quite a few. I see some, you know, I've been in practice long enough where I see some of these babies around, and once in a while, I feel like, oh my gosh, when I looked at that embryo, I felt so bad for my patient, and here, look at this beautiful baby. So yes, if the embryo is alive and it's the blastocyst stage, and we feel like it has a chance, some of these embryos can become beautiful babies.
Yeah, I agree. So back to that last question that we were talking about, what happened to those 5 embryos. She gave us some follow-up that she has a 3-year-old from that batch, 1 successful pregnancy, but then had 2 miscarriages and 3 failed frozen embryo transfers. So what I'm wondering is if maybe genetic testing would probably make sense for her if she didn't do it before, don't you think?
So I would say probably genetic testing and maybe kind of looking at what changed. Did she have a really traumatic delivery? Like I would say maybe check the uterus and the tubes, make sure everything else is okay.
Right, I agree. Okay, so the second part of her question is, just curious, also, are the ERA test and the Receptiva test the same thing?
So I would say no, they're completely different tests. They're kind of testing a different idea. I'm going to say it, but I'm not a big fan of ERA test. I know it might sound strange, and I'm certainly, you're not a big fan of ERA test?
No, I am, but I don't think it sounds strange. I think everyone has different experiences with different tests that they feel comfortable with in their own hands. Do you know what I mean? Like, you know, what gives your patients the best chances. So
yeah, so I think it's a really, really interesting idea. I love the scientific part, and I used to do it, but every time I would do it, my patient would come as receptive. And it came to the point where I felt like I've never seen it abnormal, and I've never been able to make a difference in my patient's outcome. So I don't do it as often as some other physicians. But, you know, I do wonder if it's kind of a small numbers game. And I'm looking forward for Receptiva tests to come into the picture and kind of see what it's going to do for us.
Right, right. Yeah, so for me, I found the test because I had a patient who had done 5 embryo transfers before meeting me, and everyone had told her to use a gestational carrier. And then I got some Google alert about the test. So I called the company, and it wasn't even commercially available. And they allowed me to do the test on this patient. And her window was so different than it was like 2 days off. Like I would have never, ever, 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 ever in like a million years have thought that that's how I would dose, you know, when I would start her progesterone before her transfer. And she had run out of embryos. We did another cycle, and she ended up having twins because she didn't believe that there's any way that the test could give her the answer. And I said, sure, let's transfer 2 embryos. And so the transfer worked. And who knows, could it have been another batch of embryos and nothing to do with the test? You know, you'd never really know. But after that experience and some other ones like that, I feel like in some patients, you just don't know who it could possibly help. But when I do it, I also do the 1 biopsy, and I send the cells to the 2 different companies for both tests, the ERA test and the Receptiva test, but it's not for everybody. You know, I don't do it for everybody.
Well, I agree. At some point, there is nothing else to do. So in somebody who failed so many times, I absolutely agree. It's an option.
Right. Totally. Okay. So this question is from Sunwave Summer, 29 years old with an AMH of 3.23. How many attempts of IUI do you recommend someone my age do before starting IVF? I want to have 3 to 4 healthy babies one day.
So there is a little bit, there is some information that we don't have. I would kind of assume her diagnosis is unexplained infertility because she's 29 with good AMH. To have an option to do IUIs, you should have normal uterus and fallopian tubes, and the sperm has to be close to normal. So it sounds like that's probably unexplained infertility. I think unexplained infertility is a really tricky option to kind of to explain to the patients what is it, what could it be? Well, it could be the egg quality. It could be that you're 29 with great numbers, but the egg quality is a little bit off. It could be that we have undiagnosed endometriosis and the fallopian tubes are not picking up the eggs, so cannot transport the eggs that well. It could be that you have scar tissue in the pelvis, there is nothing in her history. It could be that functionally the sperm is not so great. So I would say we should keep in mind that clomid or letrozole IUI cycles are very, in a way, close to the natural reproduction. So if it didn't work for quite a bit of time with the natural attempts to get pregnant, I honestly wouldn't really recommend trying it more than 3 times.
Right.
I would agree to do it up to 6 times if the couple really, really wanted to be conservative and do it kind of more, do more trials.
Right.
But the data is quite clear that after 3 times, if it didn't work for you, it's becoming less likely to work.
Right. No, I agree. I agree. Okay, so this next question is typically how long is the receptive, how long is your window of receptivity for a frozen embryo transfer?
Well, we think that somewhere between like 12 hours or even smaller, somewhere out there.
Yeah, I agree. Okay, so this question I'm popping up here, it says, interested in considering functional medicine approach using food as medicine as possible. It looks like the question is cut off. I can't see the whole question here. So I'm 36 years old, husband is 39. At 32, I had IVF for male factor infertility, and I can't see the rest of this question to be able to answer it. So if you're watching us, Alicia, right now, please add the rest of your question here so I can answer it. Okay, so this is from Pineapple Baby again. So Pineapple Baby is saying, one more question. I never did IUI and husband wants to try it. I know the stats are really low, but would you recommend it for a 42-year-old? If so, what stim protocol would you recommend?
So I think the issue is if the sperm is normal, then the benefit of IUI is small.
Mm-hmm.
If the sperm is abnormal, the sperm might not be good enough for an IUI. But I assume that sperm is probably normal. So then the benefit of treatment, we would usually use clomid or letrozole, and those 2 medications would usually recruit a couple of eggs. Like in a natural cycle, you release 1 egg, and with those, you would usually get 2. So the benefit of treatment is relatively small. I think there is nothing wrong about trying it one more time. Potentially you can add injectable gonadotropins, but honestly, like at this point, I would probably consider it, but we don't do a lot of injectables. We usually kind of save the cost and the effort for IVF.
Yeah.
So I would say your chances with an IUI statistically are less than 5%. So we would have to get really, really lucky. But if that's something you need to do for yourself to either get lucky and get pregnant or move on, that's acceptable.
Right, I agree. Okay, so this question is this. I'm 38 years old, having my transfer next Wednesday. I'm going through IVF because I have my tubes tied. What are the chances that this first transfer works?
32 years old with the tubes tied, your chances about 50% per embryo, if not higher. If you put in 1 embryo, if you put in 2, your chances are more like probably 60, 70%, and it drives your chances of twins up to like 30, 50%.
And what if she's 38 years old?
Well, if she's 38 years old, the picture is a little different. So if the embryos are not tested, then the single embryo gives you more like 20, 25% chance. 2 embryos give you more like 35, 40% chance. Yeah. And the tested embryo still gives you like 60, 70% chance.
Right, I agree. Okay, this is our last question. Thank you for being here. I know it's Friday night. We appreciate you taking time out of your life to join us and share all your wisdom.
Thank you for inviting me. We should do it more often.
I would love to have you back, please, often and frequently. So this is a question from Hafiza, 35 years old, 2 around each time of IVF, 10 eggs retrieved, 8 fertilized, all the embryos stopped growing on day 6. And I think I'm just going to add a question here and say, what would you do in a case like this? So if all the embryos stop growing, so no blast formation for a 35-year-old, and we'll end it there, what would you do?
Well, devastating. I think we talked about it. Modify the stimulation, talk about the lifestyle, look at the diet, look at the amount of exercise, look at the weight, bring some antioxidants into the picture. Like watch her really close during the stimulation. Sometimes there is an explanation, like the progesterone started to go up, or the trigger didn't work that well, or we didn't trigger her, you know, maybe we should have triggered her a day later, a day after. But simplistically, I would say modify IVF stimulation, watch her closely, see what you can change. Another question I have, the embryos stop growing on day 6, were the embryos morulus on day 5, and that's why they were not frozen? Most likely that's the case.
Right, right. I agree. That's probably right. Okay. Well, thank you again, Elena. Tell us again about your practice. Where do you practice? The name of your practice, where people can find you.
Yeah, so we're called Reproductive Medicine Institute. We are in Chicago. We have 4 offices in Chicago: downtown Chicago, Oak Brook in the western suburbs, Evanston on the North Shore, Oak Lawn in the southwest suburbs. We provide all kinds of services, anything that can be done in reproductive medicine, we do offer. We treat all kinds of patients. We embrace everybody who wants to build a family. We have 4 board-certified reproductive endocrinologists, physicians looking to grow and add a couple more. And you can find us in Chicago. We have the Instagram account. Recently, we started the TikTok account, having fun with that. It's a little bit of uncharted territory, but we're getting there.
Awesome. Awesome. Well, thank you again for everything. Really appreciate
you. Thank you so much, Aimee. Thank you so much. And I want to thank all the patients who kind of out there, and you know, you all strong, powerful women, and we sincerely hope that we can help you. And it's going to work out. You have to keep going, consider multiple options, and it's going to be all good.
Awesome. Thank you for that. Okay. On that note, thank you everyone for joining us, and we'll see you next time. Bye, guys. Bye, Elena. Bye-bye.